2 Corinthians chapter 5, and I want to read, starting with verse 1. For we know that if our earthly house of this tabernacle were dissolved, we have a building of God, an house not made with hands, eternal in the heavens. For in this we groan, earnestly desiring to be clothed upon with our house, which is from heaven. If so be that, being clothed, we shall not be found naked. For we that are in this tabernacle do groan, being burdened. We're in this tabernacle. I know many of you have loved ones, maybe children, friends, who their physical being is a mess. And they groan. Their physical bodies groan with pain, groan with cancer, and groan with disease. And Paul here is trying to enlighten it. For we that are in this tabernacle do groan, being burdened. He'd been beaten so many times. He'd been stoned, rocks thrown at him so many times. He'd been left for naked and dead so many times. He'd been resisted and beaten and pushed out of cities and thrown into prison so many times. And his tabernacle, his physical tabernacle, is groaning. I'm going to give us a Thanksgiving history lesson here in just a few moments, but people who groan, their bodies groan in agony, groan in pain. Both groan in agony and pain, and also groan that they might put off this fleshly being and put onto themselves mortality, or immortality. Put off mortality and put on immortality. And being burdened, continue on verses 4. Not for that we would be unclothed, but clothed upon, that mortality might be swallowed up of life. Now he that hath wrought us from the selfsame thing is God, who also hath given unto us the earnest of the Spirit. Therefore we are always confident, knowing that, whilst we are at home in the body, we are absent from the Lord. Verse 7. For we walk by faith, not by sight. Say amen.
Amen.
We walk by faith, not by sight. I'm going to give us now, listen as I read. If you don't remember, let me update us on the first pilgrims to our country. And maybe you'll learn some things that you didn't know before, but I just find it remarkable and amazing, especially in the face of our society today where so many people are disillusioned. They are enchanted by their own selfishness. They have no idea what it means to be burdened, no idea what it means to work. Not to be critical or harsh, but ye shall know them by their fruits. This is the Thanksgiving season, and I often try to reflect back upon what it was like hundreds of years ago. You listen as I read. The voyagers, just a little over 100 of them, left England September 6th, I believe it was, September 6th of 1620. They landed, it took them 66 days to get from where they had left port in England to Cape Cod in New England. They had faced rigorous storms that was pressing against them, so it took them 66 days. You'll see here in just a moment when the Mayflower headed back, it took them half amount of time because the trade winds were behind them, and they made it in 30 days going back. But listen as I read. During the winter of 1620-1621, the passengers remained on board the Mayflower, suffering an outbreak of a contagious disease described as a mixture of scurry. Scurry is a very acute deficiency of vitamin C. And so if your body goes into that deficiency of vitamin C, there are horrible consequences. And so they suffer from scurvy, they suffer from pneumonia, and they suffered from tuberculosis. Now, most of them lived in the lower cabin of the Mayflower, and if you were over 5 feet tall, you couldn't stand upright when it come time to stand upright. So you literally had to walk in the lower cabin, wherever you were, you had to walk like this if you were over 5 feet tall. Now in those days, not many were as big as maybe Eric and some of the rest of you, 6'4", 6'5", 6'6", but could you just imagine for 66 days having to walk like this, for crying out loud? Man, oh man. They had no toilets. One of the things that I want to talk about this morning concerning faith is, folks, there comes a point in time in a person's faith where they got to make a decision if they're going to be tough or not. I think sometimes we just think about faith as believing. Well, if I could just believe more, if I could just believe harder. Well, faith isn't always just about believing. Sometimes faith is about just flat out being tough. I mean, being tough. And boy, you talk about being tough. This was the DNA. Folks, these people were the DNA of the United States of America. This was the Christian birthright of our country. And so they stayed throughout the winter. They were on the ship. Actually, they had to leave. They took port in another part of England. They left, and because of the storm, they had to wait a couple weeks in the port that they finally left from. So they actually had been stuck on the Mayflower boat for almost 100 days. Their toilets consisted of a jar. So when it come time for you to go to the bathroom, you had to sit on a jar that was about this big and opening. Now, I don't know about you, but I still have nightmares about bathroom issues. There are just, maybe I shouldn't go into this realm, but there are just, I have dreams, I have nightmares, I can't find a place to go to the bathroom. I'm not kidding you. Well, okay, let's move on. But, you know what I'm saying? We talked in Sunday school about comparing. Let me tell you something, okay? It's a healthy history lesson. Now, when you think about having to go to the bathroom in a jar this big with another 100 people watching you for over 100 days, that might change your attitude the next time you go into your bathroom. You know what I'm saying? Hallelujah. This is good preaching. I don't know. I know. Described a mixture of scurvy, pneumonia, and tuberculosis. When it ended, there were only 53 passengers, just over half still alive. Likewise, half of the crew died as well. And in the spring, after they exited the Mayflower, they built huts ashore, and on March 21st, 1621, the surviving passengers disembarked from the Mayflower. So they had been on there September, October, November, December, January, February, March. 7 months like this. Due to the fear of Indian attack in late February of 1621, the settlers decided to mount our great ordinances on the hill overlooking the settlement. Christopher Jones, and I hang on to that name, because this is one of the reasons I'm reading this morning, Christopher Jones. Christopher Jones survived the transportation of the great guns, about 6 iron cannons that ranged between 4 and 8 feet in length and weighed almost a half a ton. They had 6. Some of these weighed a half a ton, some of them over 1 ton, and they had 6 of them on the Mayflower. The cannon were able to hurl iron balls 3.5 inches in diameter as far as 1,700 yards. Folks, 1,700 times 3. That's a long ways for a 3.5-inch ball in those days to be hurled. This action made what was no more than a ransacked village almost into a well-defended fortress. Jones, Christopher Jones, had originally planned to return to England as soon as the Pilgrims found the settlement site. But after his crew members began to be ravaged by the same diseases that were felling the Pilgrims, he realized he had to remain in Plymouth Harbor till he saw his men begin to recover. The Mayflower lay in New Plymouth Harbor through the winter of 1620, and on April 5th of 1621, the Mayflower, her empty hull ballasted with stones from the Plymouth Harbor shore, set sail for England. As with the Pilgrims, her sailors had been decimated by disease. Jones had lost his boatswain, his gunner, 3 quartermasters, the cook, and more than a dozen sailors. The Mayflower made excellent time on her voyage back to England. The westerly winds that had buffeted her coming out pushed her along going home, and she arrived at the home port of Rosyth in London on May 6, 1621, less than half the time it took her to sail to America. Christopher Jones died after coming back from a voyage to France on March 5th, 1622, at about age 52. It is suggested that his journey to the New World may have taken its toll on him. For the next 2 years, the Mayflower lay at her berth in Rosyth, not far from the grave of Captain Jones at St. Mary's Church there. And by 1624, the Mayflower was no longer useful as a ship, and although her subsequent fate is unknown, she was probably broken up about that time. And this is what I want us to remember. The Mayflower was the final casualty of a voyage that had cost her master, Christopher Jones, everything he could give. It cost him everything he could give. Now, folks, the reason I read that is because they walked by faith, not by sight. They walked entirely by faith to seek a new land, to seek a new place that would give them hope. They walked by faith and not by sight. And sometimes you have to get serious about faith to the point where we even become tough. Hallelujah. Turn now, if you would please, to Romans chapter 8. Romans chapter 8 and beginning with verse 24. For we are saved by hope. But hope that is seen is not hope. For what a man seeth, why doth he yet hope for it? Verse 25. But if we hope for that we see not, then do we with patience wait for it. And that's these people on the Mayflower. That's these people in 1620 and 1621. By faith and not by sight did they set out from England to discover a new world and to plant themselves that they might worship God in the freedom and not be under bondage of the king or under the queen. That they might have freedom of worship, freedom of religion. Now listen as I read this. You see, folks, seeing is believing. Seeing is believing. And hope sees. Faith is not blind. Faith has vision to see. And what faith sees is hope. Hope in that which is to come. Faith is not blind. There's no such thing as blind faith. We use that as terminology from time to time. Basically, we say that just so we don't have to explain how that we had no clue or no idea what we're doing, but we stepped out and went in. See, that takes too long. So we just say, I just went by blind faith. And that's what that means. But faith is not blind. Faith sees, otherwise we're not going. The hope that these pilgrims had, and the hope that Paul here is talking to us about believers in Christ Jesus. You see, seeing is believing. And they saw a new world in their vision of hope and vision of faith. And because of that, they were willing to press through hundreds of days and devastation and disease and heartache and suffering unimaginable to any human being, unimaginable. But because they could see, they were able to become tough, and in their toughness, they were able to survive. And because they survived, you and I have warm bathrooms to go to the bathroom in. Somebody say amen.